My name is Emily Carter. Yes, I'm 34 years old, and my family still believes I'm the biggest disappointment in the Carter family. As far as they know, I rent a tiny apartment in Minneapolis, drive a 12-year-old Honda Civic, and work long nights as a logistics coordinator just to keep my bills paid. What they don't know is that I quietly build IronGate Global Logistics into a company worth over $4.1 billion on Earth. I never told them because growing up, every achievement of mine somehow became my older brother Jason's victory. If I graduated with honors, my parents said Jason had inspired me. When I started my first business, they laughed and told me to find a real career. After enough years, I stopped trying to prove anything. Then, 2 weeks before Christmas, my mother called. "Emily," she said, "we're celebrating Jason's promotion on Christmas Eve. You need to be here by 5. Don't be late this time." The way she emphasized need made me suspicious. My family never wanted me early unless they had something planned. Still, I smiled to myself and agreed. On Christmas Eve, I left my penthouse through the private garage, changed into the same inexpensive coat I'd owned for years, parked my Bentley 3 blocks away, and drove my old Honda the rest of the way to my parents' house in Edina. I wanted to see exactly how they treated the daughter they still believed had failed. The moment I stepped inside, my mother's eyes traveled from my worn coat to my scuffed shoes. "You couldn't even dress properly for your brother's big night?" She sighed loudly enough for everyone to hear. Before I could answer, my Aunt Diane smiled with fake sympathy. "At least she came," she said. "That's progress." Laughter spread across the room. Jason stood beside the fireplace wearing a tailored navy suit, accepting congratulations like he'd just become president of the United States. He wrapped one arm around his wife, Olivia, then looked at me. "Hey, Em," he said with a grin. "Don't worry. Tonight isn't about comparing our lives." A few relatives chuckled. I simply smiled. If they only knew that the company Jason had spent the last 3 months desperately trying to impress was mine, and judging by the smug look on his face, he had absolutely no idea that before this night was over, my family was about to make the biggest mistake of their lives. I took a seat near the end of the dining table while everyone gathered around. Jason like he was the guest of honor. A gold banner reading "Congratulations, Jason" stretched across the wall behind him, and expensive champagne flowed as if he'd just built an empire overnight. My father stood first. "I've waited years for this moment," he announced proudly. "Jason has finally become the leader this family always needed." The room erupted in applause. My mother wiped away fake tears before turning toward me. "I hope you're paying attention, Emily. Success leaves clues." I forced a polite smile and nodded. Jason began describing his new position as Chief Executive Officer of North Star Medical Solutions. He proudly explained his salary, executive bonuses, company SUV, and plans to buy a lakefront home outside Minneapolis before summer. Every sentence sounded carefully rehearsed. Every compliment fed his ego a little more. When dessert arrived, Jason passed his phone around so everyone could admire pictures of the house he planned to purchase. By the time the phone reached me, he smiled confidently. "Don't get too attached," he joked. "The property taxes alone probably cost more than your yearly income." The table burst into laughter. I quietly handed the phone back. "If you like it," I replied calmly. "I hope everything works out." Jason smirked. "Oh, it will." Then my Aunt Diane leaned forward. "So, Emily, are you still answering truck dispatch calls?" Before I could answer, my Uncle Richard laughed.
"I've always wondered."
"Do they actually train people for that job? Or do you just answer phones and hope the drivers figure things out?" More laughter. "Well, it takes a little more than that," I answered. My mother interrupted before I could continue. "Honey, don't make it sound more important than it is." The conversation shifted completely toward me. How much was my rent? Did I finally have health insurance? Was I still driving that embarrassing Honda? Had I considered going back to school? Was I ever planning to buy a home? They weren't asking because they cared. They were building a case against me. Then my father reached beneath his chair and placed a thick blue folder on the table. "I think it's time." The room suddenly became quiet. Jason smiled. "I wasn't going to do this tonight," he lied. "But Mom and Dad convinced me." He slid the folder across the table until it stopped in front of me. Inside was an employment contract. Jason wanted me to quit my dead-end job and become his executive assistant. Salary, $48,000 per year. Responsibilities included managing his calendar, booking travel, organizing family events, handling personal errands, and performing other duties assigned by the CEO. I looked up. "You want me to work for you?" Jason folded his hands. I want to save you. My father nodded approvingly. This is probably the best opportunity you'll ever receive. My mother added, honestly, Emily, you should be grateful. Most successful people wouldn't hire family. I slowly turned another page. There was more. If I accepted the position, I would temporarily move into Jason and Olivia's guest room so I could learn professional discipline and save money. Olivia smiled sweetly. It'll also help after the baby comes. The room exploded with excitement. Baby? I asked. Olivia rested a hand on her stomach. We're 12 weeks along. Everyone stood to hug them. Congratulations filled the room. I genuinely smiled. The baby had done nothing wrong. But as everyone celebrated, my attention drifted back to the contract. Hidden beneath the final page was another document. Its title caught my eye immediately. Carter Family Property Trust. Before I could read another word, my mother reached over, pulled the paper away, and quickly slipped it back into the folder. That's not for you, she said sharply. For the first time all evening, I realized this dinner had never been about helping me. They wanted something else. And whatever it was, they were desperate to make sure I never saw that document. I didn't ask another question. Instead, I closed the folder, thanked Jason for the offer, and told everyone I wanted one day to think about it. Jason's smile disappeared. Emily, he said, leaning back in his chair. People without options usually don't negotiate. I'll still think about it, I replied. The room fell silent. My father shook his head in disappointment. You've always confused stubbornness with independence. A few minutes later, everyone moved into the living room for coffee while I stepped into the hallway to grab my coat. That's when I heard Olivia's voice coming from my parents' home office. The door wasn't completely closed. No, the valuation can't stay that way, she whispered. If Crestbridge Capital sees the original warehouse numbers, they'll delay the financing. A man's voice answered through the speakerphone. What about the property title? We're using the updated documents, Olivia replied. Nobody has questioned them in years. My instincts immediately kicked in. Years of building billion-dollar logistics companies had taught me one thing. People only whisper when they're hiding something. I quietly walked away before the conversation ended. A moment later, Olivia stepped into the hallway. She froze the instant she saw me. How long were you standing there? Long enough. She forced a smile. You probably misunderstood. Maybe. She crossed her arms. Finance isn't exactly your field. I smiled politely. You're right. She relaxed. Then I added, but fraud investigations are. The color drained from her face. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, she laughed nervously. You watch too many crime shows. Without another word, she walked back inside. I let her. There was no reason to warn someone who was already making mistakes. As I reached the front door, someone gently touched my arm. It was my grandmother, Eleanor. Come with me, she whispered. She led me into the garage, making sure nobody else followed. From her purse, she removed a small brass key attached to an old leather tag. I should have given you this years ago. What is it? A safe deposit box. She looked toward the house before continuing. Your grandfather left it for you. I frowned. My parents told me everything was settled after Grandpa passed away. They lied. My heart skipped. Eleanor took a slow breath. Your grandfather left you 25% ownership of an industrial property near the Mississippi River. I stared at her. What? It wasn't worth much back then. She paused. But after several logistics companies expanded into Minneapolis, the land became extremely valuable. My mind immediately recognized the address she mentioned. Not because I'd inherited it, because IronGate Global had spent the last 18 months trying to purchase the surrounding properties for a major expansion. That single parcel was the only piece preventing construction from moving forward. Eleanor continued. After your grandfather died, your parents claimed you'd voluntarily transferred your ownership to the Carter Family Trust. I never signed anything. I know. She squeezed my hand. I saw the signature. It wasn't yours. A cold feeling settled in my chest. My father forged it? I believe he did. She looked down. I kept hoping they'd tell you the truth. They never did. I closed my fingers around the key. What happened to the property?
They pledged it as collateral.
For Jason? She nodded. To secure financing that helped expand his company years ago. Everything suddenly made sense. The hidden document, Olivia's nervous phone call, the rushed employment contract, the desperate attempt to keep me distracted. They weren't trying to save me. They were trying to keep me from discovering that the property legally belonged to me. And if that ownership was challenged, Jason's entire financial foundation could collapse. As I drove home that night, I unlocked a secure phone reserved for IronGate executives. 3 encrypted messages were waiting. Now, the first was from my chief legal officer. The second was from our head of corporate security. The third stopped me cold. Urgent, anonymous whistleblower. Submission regarding North Star Medical Solutions. I opened it. Inside were internal emails, altered financial statements, warehouse inventory discrepancies, and documents suggesting someone inside North Star had intentionally inflated assets before seeking a multi-billion-dollar logistics partnership. The final sentence read, "Their CEO and CFO both know exactly what's happening." I stared at the screen. Jason and Olivia weren't just hiding one secret. They were about to walk into the biggest business presentation of their lives. Without realizing, the woman reviewing every single document was me. The morning after Christmas, I arrived at IronGate Global's headquarters in downtown Minneapolis before sunrise. For years, I'd avoided making public appearances inside the company. Whenever major partners visited, my executive team handled those meetings while I quietly focused on building the business behind the scenes. Today was different. Today, I intended to be seen. At 8:45 a.m., my chief operating officer, Rachel Morgan, walked into the executive boardroom carrying a tablet. "Our legal team finished reviewing everything," she said. "The whistleblower documents are authentic. The property records are even worse." She placed several folders on the table. "The Carter family trust never legally owned that industrial property." I nodded. I expected that. "The forged signature won't survive forensic examination." "It doesn't have to," I replied. "They've already buried themselves." At exactly 9 o'clock, Jason, Olivia, my parents, and several relatives entered the executive floor. Through the glass wall, I watched Jason straighten his tie before handing his presentation case to the receptionist. Then they saw me, not in my old coat, not carrying a work bag. I was standing at the head of the boardroom table wearing a Navy executive suit, with IronGate's leadership team seated beside me. The room froze. Jason blinked twice. Emily?" My mother looked around in confusion. What are you doing in there?" Rachel calmly opened the boardroom door. "Good morning," she said. "Our chairwoman is ready for your presentation." Nobody moved. Jason laughed awkwardly. "There must be some mistake." Rachel looked directly at him. "There isn't." She turned toward me. "Miss Carter, your guests have arrived." My father's face turned pale. Olivia's hands immediately began shaking. Jason slowly looked at me. "You—" I smiled politely. "Welcome to IronGate Global." Silence. The same family, who had spent years calling me a failure, now couldn't say a single word. Jason finally managed to speak. "You own IronGate?" "I founded it 12 years ago." My mother grabbed the back of a chair to steady herself. "But your apartment, your car." "I kept them because they reminded me where I started." I paused. "Not because they reflected what I was worth." The presentation still went forward, exactly as I wanted. Jason confidently repeated every financial claim. Olivia confirmed every number. They insisted their inventory, collateral, and accounting records were completely accurate. Only after they finished did Rachel dim the lights. A new presentation appeared. Not theirs. Ours. Every altered financial statement. Every manipulated inventory report. Every email from the anonymous whistleblower. Every version history. Every deleted spreadsheet. Every inconsistency. Then came the final slide. Carter Family Property Trust. The original documents appeared beside the forged transfer. A forensic handwriting expert's report filled the screen. The signature wasn't mine. It never had been. Outside counsel quietly explained that the property legally remained under my ownership, which meant it could never have been used as collateral for Jason's financing. The lender's representative immediately closed his notebook. "This meeting is over." Jason stood up. "Emily, please, just let me explain." I looked at him for a long moment.
"I tried explaining my life to all of you yesterday."
No one listened. Security entered the room, not for my family, but to escort the lender and legal representatives to a private conference. Within hours, the financing was suspended. Multiple regulatory investigations began. The forged property transfer became evidence. The fraudulent financial reports became evidence. Jason resigned within a week. Olivia lost her position shortly afterward. Months later, my parents asked to meet. For the first time in my life, they apologized. Not because I was worth $4.1 billion. Not because I owned IronGate, but because they finally realized they had spent years measuring my value by appearances instead of character. I accepted their apology, but I never returned the life they had tried to control. Some distances protect your peace better than forgiveness alone. Today, IronGate employs over 18,000 people across the United States. Every Christmas, I still drive that old Honda at least once. Not because I need to, because it reminds me that the people who truly deserve a place in your life will respect you long before they ever discover what you're worth.